I've been sick all week, hence why the only thing I managed to get out to you guys this week is something that I started recording 2 weeks ago, and I am still sick, in case you couldn't tell. I also just drank a big glass of eggnog with some rum in it, so my filter's a little low, but by golly gosh, I'm gonna get a review out to you guys if it kills me. And I think it's appropriate that the review that I'm willing to risk my life for is the review of Star Wars The Last Jedi, Star Wars Episode 8, the bridging point in this new Star Wars trilogy brought to us by Disney, and I would say by far the most anticipated movie of the year. And I'm going to come right out and say it right now. I have very mixed feelings about this movie. But stick around, because I'm going to explain myself, obviously. I know a lot of people are ranting and raving about how great this movie is, and they're not wrong. But there are also plenty of people out there saying that this is a bad movie, that it's a betrayal of Star Wars, that it just doesn't handle itself well. And they're not wrong either. Obviously, I am not a proper critic. I review movies and I review TV shows, but I do so from the perspective of how they make me feel personally. Every once in a while, I'll care enough about the technical aspects of a movie that I'll actually factor those technical aspects into my review process, but for the most part, I just don't. Unless something looks so bad, unless something is technically so bad that it brings me out of the movie, even for a second, I tend not to care about that kind of stuff. Going entirely off of how this movie made me feel, I am very conflicted about this. Just as The Force Awakens was, in a way, a remake of the original Star Wars, this movie was, in a way, a remake of The Empire Strikes Back. It was less of a beat-for-beat remake and more of a thematic remake, but it still had a lot in common with that movie and did share a few beats with it. First of all, let's get the technical aspects of the movie out of the way, just to start with. It was a beautifully shot movie. It was so well directed. The CGI, of course, looked perfect. The model work, of course, looked perfect. And it felt very Star Wars. We got to see a lot of Rebel technology in this, a lot of Imperial technology, or First Order technology, I guess, at this point. And it all felt very Star Wars. There was, in particular, a medical device that we see Finn in at one point. And when I saw it, I'm just like, look how 80s that is. It was so 80s. It felt like something that you might have seen in the original trilogy. It didn't have that new spit and polish that you would have gotten in the prequel trilogy, for example. It felt like something lifted right out of the Star Wars universe as it already existed, and yet we'd never really seen anything like it before. The technical aspects, the production design, all of it was absolutely flawless. Character stuff was really strong. The acting was all really strong, especially from Mark Hamill. People give him shit to a lesser degree than they do Hayden Christensen for his portrayal of Luke Skywalker in the original trilogy, because he wasn't honestly that amazing. So here, he had an opportunity to show his true acting chops when it came to applying them to the character of Luke Skywalker, and he did a fantastic job. Luke at this point is a very different character than he was at the end of the original trilogy, and yet this version of Luke never didn't feel like Luke Skywalker. He never didn't feel like a natural progression of that character with the events preceding this new trilogy applied to his characterization. Rey was great, but honestly a little underplayed in this movie, especially compared to the last one. Finn was great, but also underplayed in this movie compared to the last one. This was Luke Skywalker's movie, this was General Leia's movie, and this was Poe Dameron's movie, which was absolutely fantastic because we didn't get enough of him in the last movie. We learned just enough about him to know that he was going to be an interesting character when we did see more, and getting to see more of him in this movie proved that true. He is very interesting. He's someone who genuinely believes in this rebellion, and will do anything to see it survive. But he also learns throughout this movie. He's taught lessons throughout this movie. This is a very gray movie, and never before has the Resistance seemed like such a bleak thing. I made the comparison to The Empire Strikes Back for a reason. After Empire first came out, a lot of people felt the same way about it that I do this movie. It ended on a downer note. Our heroes are out and about doing their thing. Everything feels like we're coming to an ending very much like the ending of the previous movie, where the good guys win a huge victory and everything is better for everybody. And then we find out that Vader is Luke's father, the good guys lose, have to retreat, and we end on a downer note, unsure of the future. But now, looking back on Empire, it is probably the most fondly remembered of the Star Wars movies. It's my favorite by a wide margin. But not only that, it is one of my favorite movies ever and one of my favorite movie sequels ever, because what it added to the franchise brought a lot to the movies that succeeded it. And that's why I have confidence that even though I feel conflicted about this movie now, looking back on it, I'm going to absolutely love it, assuming that they handle the subsequent movies well. If the situation presented to us in Empire made us feel like the prospects for the future were bleak, but that there was still a spark of hope. This movie managed to do that, but turn it up to 11. A large chunk of this movie was just a display of exactly how bleak the chances of the Resistance are, how bleak their chances for the future are, how sure it is that they've lost this war already. And yet at the end, we are given a spark of hope, which I feel is probably one of the bright points in this film. Just like at the end of Empire. I honestly have no idea how the heroes are going to come back from this, but I still feel hopeful that they will. I haven't mentioned Kylo Ren yet, and that's because even though he didn't get a ton to do in this movie either, of all of the characters in this movie who were a little underplayed, I think he was the most important. We learn his history with Luke. We learn exactly what happened at the new Jedi temple that Luke was heading. We learn a bit about his motivations. Just like in the past movie, he is treated as a vulnerable person with lots of room to grow, just like our heroes. He isn't the perfect statuesque wall to overcome that Vader was. And his development continues to be one of the most intriguing things in this new Star Wars franchise to me. Whereas Vader's motivations in the original trilogy were that he wanted to bring order to the galaxy by any means necessary, honestly, looking back, I never really felt that. I never really got that from his character, just from synopses of his character's motivations. But in Kylo Ren, I get that sense that that's genuinely what he wants. He feels like everything would be better if everyone fell under the purview of the First Order's control. And obviously that's fascism, and that's wrong. And obviously the lengths that he's willing to go to achieve that are pretty horrendous. But you really do feel like his heart is in the right place. And I think that's genuinely marvelous characterization. That's the kind of thing that we never really saw in the original trilogy. We were told on occasion that characters had that kind of depth to them, but we've never really shown it. That's the difference here. We see it for ourselves. It's obvious. It's plain, it's laid bare, it's raw, and I really respect the movie for that, for just how gray it became, how blurred the lines between black and white really were here. The original trilogy is a very good versus evil kind of movie. It never really got more gray than Empire. There were some things in Empire that were kind of on the gray side. But at the end, it came down to a choice between darkness and light, and the light won. There wasn't much of a compromise there. And the prequel trilogy, thematically speaking, was so directionless that any gray morality in those movies just kind of gets lost in the maelstrom of everything else. But with this movie, this new Star Wars trilogy is really digging deep. But with this movie, this new trilogy really digs deep into the notion that there isn't such a huge divide between the dark and the light, that things need to be gray in order for true balance to be achieved. And honestly, that's where the conflicted feelings that I have about this movie come from, at least for the most part. My first instinct is to hate that, because I want the good guys to win. I want good to triumph over evil and it to be really clear cut and everybody to get a happy ending. But at the same time, I don't, because that's not how the world works, and it's always great to see your heroes still triumph in a world that works like the real world. I think at the end of the day, that's even more hopeful than the good guys winning in a saccharine, manufactured universe designed to accommodate that black and white morality. More gray morality is something that the main series of Star Wars has needed for a long time, and I respect this movie for bringing it. But there were also some things about this movie that I found genuinely disappointing. And while I do feel like this may be the best Star Wars movie since Empire, and I do feel like I'm going to look back on it very fondly in the future, this movie does not surpass Empire, regardless of what some people are saying. First of all, it was finally revealed to us who Rey's parents were. It was treated with the same kind of game-changing weight as the reveal that Vader was Anakin Skywalker. And for me, I didn't buy it. Yeah, it's probably going to turn out that it was entirely true, that there was no deception here whatsoever, but I felt like I was being lied to. And granted, that's what audiences at the time felt about the reveal in Empire. They felt like they were being lied to. That's why we had to get a scene between Obi-Wan and Luke where Obi-Wan confirmed what Vader said, because audiences didn't believe that Vader was telling the truth. I didn't believe that the character who revealed Rey's parentage to her in this movie was telling the truth. And so unless they decide to pull a twist on us and make it a lie, then finally, I know exactly how those audiences felt at the time. It was a hard truth for me to hear. And honestly, I will say that regardless of how favorably people look on this movie in the future, treating that moment with equal weight to Vader's reveal in Empire I think was a mistake, thematically speaking, because it didn't have the same weight. But assuming that they do good things with that information going forward, assuming that it informs Rey's character properly and it informs the narrative properly in the next movie, it can round out to be pretty great. But honestly, I don't buy it for a lot of different reasons. I have genuine reason to believe that it was a lie in the context of the movie, as well as in the context of this new Star Wars trilogy overall, and all the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes. I may actually do a second spoiler review of this movie. I mean, I know I say that about a lot of movies and then I just end up not doing it, but that's more because I go to write those reviews and realize there's nothing else I really need to say, but I feel like I need to say this enough that I will probably make a spoiler review of this movie just to talk about this point. So honestly, I don't know what to feel about that scene. And jumping back in front of the camera real quick to re-record the part about Snoke. While we're talking about stuff that is best dealt with in the spoiler review, let's just save all my commentary on him for that. Just leave it at he was disappointed, and he had enough potential that he shouldn't have been. There was also the entire Finn and Rose subplot that's been heavily advertised in all of this movie's marketing. Rose is a new character, a resistance technician who goes on an adventure with Finn. We've known that this subplot was going to happen for a while. I wasn't surprised by it at all. And I was watching other reviews that came out before I got a chance to see the movie, and people kept saying that these scenes are the ones that this movie could lose and not really lose anything. And I'm like, no, I like Finn, and I like everything that I know about this Rose character so far. I'm sure I'm going to like these scenes. I'm sure they're going to be good. And it's not as if there wasn't anything in them that was redeeming. It's not as if there weren't good moments in them. But I do actually agree. They could be removed from this movie and the movie really wouldn't lose anything. Which is super disappointing because I still really love Finn's character and I really did like Rose's character. I really enjoyed her contribution to the movie from a character point of view. But their subplot together just didn't work for me all that much. At the end of the day, it gave Poe an excuse to do some stuff, but I feel like the narrative probably could have found another excuse for him to do those things, though there was a bit of commentary in them which contributed to the theme of gray morality strewn throughout this movie. So I guess thematically they do fit, and there was a little bit at the end that called back to those scenes, though I feel like those scenes at the end still would have worked without the callback, so I don't know. I'm conflicted about the Finn and Rose scenes for completely different reasons than I'm conflicted about the rest of the movie. Let's put it that way. Again, the next movie could do something fantastic with the stuff that was set up in those scenes. And I honestly hope that it does. But as they stand, I just don't feel like they brought anything substantial enough to this movie to justify them being there, especially considering how long this movie was. If I'm not mistaken, it was somewhere around 2.5 hours. And while it didn't particularly feel long to me, it didn't feel too long to me, I can imagine it probably did to some people, and those people are probably saying, why did we need those scenes? It made this movie too long, and it was unpleasant. There was also a scene between Rose and Finn towards the end of the movie, at the climax of the movie, that even considering all of their growth together throughout the course of the movie, I felt like it came out of nowhere. Looking forward to seeing where that goes, because as of right now, let's just say it was another scene in this movie that I didn't quite buy. Though it did give Rose a really great line, I will admit to that. We also learned a lot of neat things about the Force in this movie, and I have no idea how in line these things are with the overarching mythology of Star Wars as we've known it for the past, oh god, like 30 years at this point. I imagine it probably flies in the face of some of the things that we've seen in the Legends continuity, for example. But I honestly don't care, because it was really freaking cool. Though the next movie is going to have to answer the question of why the First Order is even a problem anymore, if some of the things that were done with the Force in this movie can be done with the Force. And I'm honestly going to be really disappointed if they choose not to even address that question. But it was still really cool nonetheless. At the end of the day, this movie was a fantastic look at black and white morality versus gray morality. It was a great deconstruction and examination of the themes of Star Wars overall, with some fantastic messages about sacrificing for what you believe in, on both sides, the dark and the light, and gave us some of the best shots in the entire franchise and some of the best character moments out of any of the movies so far. At the end of this movie, I was left feeling conflicted, and I still feel conflicted, but it's a good kind of conflicted, for the most part. Honestly though, I can't bring myself to rate this movie. Maybe down the line, maybe after thinking about it some more, maybe after going into spoilers, I'll be able to rate this movie, but as it stands, I can't. I can't articulate how good this movie is on a rating scale. So I'm just going to say, if you are a Star Wars fan, you should see this movie. If you're a fan of good cinema, you should see this movie. You may be disappointed, you may not. I don't know, and I can't tell you. I can't tell you which you're going to be. You're just going to have to go find out for yourselves. And you should. And that's where I'm going to leave that. All of that said, though, guys, if you have seen Star Wars The Last Jedi, without any spoilers, please let me know in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.